We're going to look specifically at the Mongols. And so the Mongols were one of these Central Asian nomadic groups that lived the nomadic lifestyle we just kind of looked at. And you can see an example of their housing down there, the yurts. Again, these yurts were made up of animal products, and they could be completely broken down and taken with them as they traveled from grazing land to grazing land. So these are the 5 animals that the Mongols really depended on. And you have your camels, your sheep, your goat, and your ox. But the most vital animal to the Mongol lifestyle were their horses. So the Mongols were one of these nomadic groups that were divided originally into many different tribes. And Genghis Khan, and you'll see this spelled different ways. So when you see it, sometimes you see it with the CH, which is actually the correct translation. Sometimes you see it with the G, which comes from the Persian translation. It's the same person though. So Genghis Khan is going to unite the different Mongol tribes. He's going to do this partially through alliances that he made with other powerful tribe leaders, partially through conquest. But he's going to unite the Mongols and become the Grand Khan, which is what Genghis Khan means, the universal ruler, the great ruler. And so once uniting the Mongols, they then begin to expand outward. And they're going to begin their conquest by taking over Central Asia and northern China. They're going to overrun several nomadic groups there, including the Jurchen peoples in northern China, and controlled most of northern China by 1220 or so. At this point, the Song dynasty still ruled the southern part of China, and they're going to remain in control of that for the time being, and they're going to allow the Song dynasty to continue. Now, the Mongols have a very bad reputation when it came to conquering, and there are times where they could be brutal. And so if a city tried to resist the Mongols, they often made examples out of them. And those are the cases where they would go in and they would completely slaughter pretty much all of the inhabitants, men, women, children. There's stories of them piling up their heads into pyramids outside the city, or perhaps allowing a few survivors to escape to spread fear of the Mongols in neighboring cities. And so they could be very destructive and very brutal. However, typically if a city surrendered, they were pretty much left alone. They would leave the existing leadership in place, and that leadership would kind of pledge their loyalty to the Mongols. And as long as they paid tribute, they were pretty much left alone. So after conquering Central Asia and northern China, Genghis Khan is then going to set his sights on Persia. Now, initially, he intended only to set up kind of a trade relationship with Persia. And at this time, Persia was under the control of the Khwarezm Shah. And then you had the Abbasid Caliphate that still kind of ruled the further Eastern Mediterranean. And so Genghis Khan actually sends a trade envoy to the Khwarezm Shah to set up a trade negotiations with the Shah. And the story goes that the Shah had this trade envoy murdered, and that's going to cause the Mongols to take over Persia. And so as they push into Persia, they were extremely destructive. The Mongol forces destroyed many Persian cities. They destroyed the Qanat system, which was the underground irrigation canals. And that's going to really set back their agriculture production for a century or so. Now, despite this brutality, overall, Mongol rule could also be very tolerant. Once they conquered a territory, they offered religious toleration. So Confucians, Buddhists, Taoists, and Muslims were all accepted. And merchants are going to benefit because, and we're going to look more at this in a little bit, but trade is going to flourish under the Mongols because they build this huge contiguous empire. And they did a great job of protecting trade routes and keeping banditry down. And so trade is going to flourish. Merchants are going to benefit from that as well. It's said that Genghis Khan actually brought in different religious officials to debate theological issues, and even sought out Taoists to help try to find him an elixir for immortality. And so, yes, the Mongols were brutal at times, but they were also very tolerant of the peoples that they conquered. They were also very good at using the strengths of different peoples in their empire. For example, the Persians and Turks were known for good government, and so they would often use Persians and Turks in their bureaucracy all throughout their empire. And so after the death of Chinggis Khan, his empire is going to be divided into 4 different khanates, and one of his sons, Ogadai, will be chosen to be the next Grand Khan. So the Mongol war machine, the Mongol military, first off, it was comprised entirely of cavalry forces. And the Mongols were great horsemen. They were also great archers, and they could actually fire accurately on horseback, upwards of 350 yards. And they pretty much grew up in the saddle. As soon as they could walk, they were on horseback, and they could stay on horseback for days at a time, eating and even sleeping on their horses. And so the importance of their cavalry units is that it made their army very mobile and also very adaptable. As they conquered, they actually adopted strategies that they had to learn on the go. For example, the Mongols initially did not have siege weapons to surround cities and wait them out. And so they're going to have to adopt these siege weapons like catapults and bamboo rockets in order to take control of these cities that tried to resist. And so they were also very adaptable. Another one of their favorite kind of fighting tactics was to feign a retreat. So they would fake a retreat and get the enemy chasing after them, and then they would send in their heavy cavalry units to finish off the enemy. And so another thing they were very good at was using spies and using terror as a weapon. And so they would completely annihilate entire cities, kill all the inhabitants, and create these pyramids of heads to kind of scare neighboring cities. They would send informants ahead of them to gather information and intelligence on these cities before they moved in, and to see if perhaps these cities were open to negotiating or surrendering without a fight. They would send in informants ahead to start spreading terror of the Mongols, so that when the Mongols arrived, the cities were ready to surrender. They were also very good at sending out spies ahead of them to create maps and layouts of the territory in front of them. So that's another thing that made the Mongol war machine very effective.